Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you for attending our first annual day at DISA. Really excited about it, and we'll look forward to your feedback as we send out surveys within the next week or so. Nina and I, unfortunately, have the unenviable position of being the last presenters between you and the mixer, right, and your beverage of choice. So, so understanding that, right, and with that being said, I'm going to attempt to use a principle my mom taught me a while ago. As a little kid, it was the 3B principle. And for those that are unaware, it means be bright, be brief, and be gone. So we will help navigate you out of here today. So as we think about that, and as we look at our agenda, as we get underway, I think we should always begin with the end in mind. And when I talk about the end in mind, literally, what should you walk out of here with? At the end of our presentation today, you should be aware of the best practices for drafting your medical marijuana policies and how best to design your program to include testing methodologies and program reviews. So at the end, that's what you truly should walk away with. So we're gonna start out talking about policies and the importance of policies. Let me just ask a question. How many people in the audience have updated their policies in the last 12 months, your employee policies? It's fantastic. How many in the last 18 months? How many in the last 24 months? Although we are aware that it's important to update your policies, it rarely becomes urgent until it becomes a problem. The emerging issues facing us today in marijuana that we have talked about as a result of our day with DISA are a large part of the issues that policies do not adequately cover, as the data from the National Safety Council supports the value proposition that employee policies are often incomplete and they fail to adequately address employee prescription drug use and abuse. As the landscape continues to change when it comes to marijuana use, safety, prescription drugs, and of course abuse, it is critical now more than ever for employers to address their issues in terms of their policies. As it relates to the substance abuse testing performed, a couple of things I'd like to bring to your attention. From an employer standpoint, we're doing a fantastic job of pre-employment testing, over 82%. We're using random testing effectively. When we talk about random testing, as you're aware, is quite a deterrent to prescription and drug abuse. 69% of employers take advantage of it, and it is likely very high when you consider the entire population involved. Post-accident and reasonable suspicion tests, they essentially can pay for your entire program. When you think about trying to show value for your compliance programs, post-accident and reasonable suspicion are the ways to go. As we look at prescription drug use and as we look at abuse and marijuana use, factored in with the low unemployment rate, I submit to you that we should see a follow-up over the next couple of years as it relates to return of duty testing. As Nina takes us through her segments of the presentation, she will speak to you more about the anticipated increases as it relates to testing for return to duty and follow-up. So, Frank, you're here to tell us about a policy. What are the things that we really need to know walking out of here in order to create an effective policy? As you start to think about drug testing compliance, I would encourage you to make sure that your programs have these 5 basic elements, and we'll go into those elements in a little bit more detail. The first element I'd like to talk about is a clearly written policy. For members of the audience that have worked with me and for my teams that are in the audience, you constantly hear me say, what is simple is understood, what is understood gets executed. Let me repeat that. What is simple is understood, what is understood gets executed. This is extremely applicable when drafting your policies. Make sure your policies are clear. As you think about the workplace policies, I would challenge you to challenge yourself to ensure that they address all the key points on the screen. And one of the key points is defining under the influence in the policy. Right. And that's where defining under the influence is where you're going to need to partner with your TPAs and your legal to help effectively define that out for your organization. And I'd just like to say, from a shameless plug perspective, please remember that here at DISA, we can help you with that. As it relates to employee education, education is often required and always recommended. Education is the #1 deterrent. So as you think about your educational programs, ensure that you've reviewed them, you've updated them, and that you've had an opportunity to ensure that they are appropriate for the multi-jurisdictions that you're working in. As a deterrent, education garners buy-in from the employee, and they provide a way for employers to have hundreds, if not thousands, of extra safety professionals and vigilance professionals. As you think about your training, make sure you train to your policy and ensure that everyone is clear on their obligations associated with your policy. As we think about supervisor training, your supervisor training, continue to focus on the elements listed on this particular screen. Issues with drug testing are generally around documentation. So when you talk about documentation and procedures, this is usually where the greatest gap or the greatest hurdle or highest risk exists for employers. Supervisor training is always recommended and should always be reoccurring. DISA has supervisor training and new training that we will be rolling out during the month of November. This training will support WebEx, in-person, and of course, online training. So please look for that information to roll out in the month of November from our organization. Employee assistance is the one item, as you think about these list of 5 items, that's often most overlooked. And it often gets put aside for a multitude of factors. As employers look at the investment that you are making in skilled workers, along with the opioid epidemic and the marijuana use, I submit to you it's critical to consider rehabilitation, follow-up testing, and return to duty. I'll challenge you to make sure that you have a substance abuse professional as a key component of your program, and that your program is not only good for the company, but it yields success in terms of success rates. In addition, remember that substance abuse not only impacts the users, they impact the families as well. Having an EAP program available to support these employees has definitely a far-reaching impact upon your organization. And as it relates to drug testing, I'll bring your attention to the 5 bullet points on the screen. I won't rehash them for you, you have them. I want you to know that testing is sometimes the only thing that is focused on by employers. But I submit to you, by itself, it's not the most important thing. It is a comprehensive program. So you should walk away understanding when I say comprehensive, you need to address all elements 1 through 5. Nina is going to take us through the next 3 sections of the presentation and help each of us understand how innovative companies plan to implement drug testing in their workplace in the very near future. Nina.
Okay, thanks, Frank. So I have the unenviable job of being really almost the last thing you have to do before those drinks, and also to try and take all of the information that you got from all of these sessions that you attended today and try and make sense of them. So if you were just in my last session, we're going to have some overlap. But what I want to do is sort of give you some insight into some of the things that we do in our industry, that the people at DISA do, and really talk about this game of chess that I think of when you're looking at your drug testing program. I continue to reinforce that a drug testing program and a drug testing policy should not be something that you write. So Frank asked for the show of hands, right? 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. It should not be something that you write and you put in a drawer. It has to be a living, breathing document within your organization. In order for it to be an effective living, breathing document and program, then you have to keep up on all of this stuff, right? You have to exercise the policy regularly. I don't know that you could have come through today and not understood some of these pieces, right? But opioids, the numbers don't lie. We've seen some things flatten out, but it is an ongoing issue. And no matter where you do business, it is an ongoing issue. Now we're starting to likely see where doctors are not prescribing as much, but there's still a lot of abuse, there's a lot of addiction, there's a lot on the streets. So you've got to really be thinking about it for employers. When we talk to employers, a lot of you are concerned about it. But sometimes then the concern doesn't actually translate into what you're doing in your workplace. And it does seem overwhelming, right? I mean, it's a lot of information. You turn on the nightly news and you hear something about it and you understand it. And then we're all telling you, like, be careful, the laws are changing, be careful about the side of the abuse, be careful about all the things it impacts, you know, make sure you got your policy up to date. So it is overwhelming. So, you know, the idea is that this will help you to think about it a little differently, to make it a little easier, and then to go from concern to actual implementation of it. You've seen this slide before today, most likely, but what's the impact of all of these things? Some of this stuff is super easy, right? So absenteeism and missed work. Crazy thing is, think about how often you hear about people who are like, we had to bring in grief counselors because somebody OD'd on the job, right? I had a client who found somebody with a needle in their arm, dead, right? There are things that we never kind of really thought we'd be dealing with as employers that we're dealing with as the result of the opioid epidemic. As we're seeing marijuana legalized, there are things that we hadn't really thought about with marijuana. And so you've got to be thinking about all of those things and think about all of the different impacts of them. So some of them, again, are super easy. If you've got a workers' comp claim, you've got a number and you can take it to the powers that be and say, this is the number and this is why we're doing it. Some of these, like family member of the affected employee, right? So then that's affecting their job performance because they're dealing with that at home. Those are much harder for you in an HR or a safety position to put a number on and say, this is why we want to change our program or modify our program. But many of you have been affected by it. This is a super duper complicated graph. It's kind of hard. But basically it's saying the same thing, right? So people believe that they are prepared, but I challenge that the level of preparedness across the organization and sort of that policy that is that's being adapted to keep up, I think a lot of people think they're a little bit more prepared than they actually are. And again, you guys have different jobs. This is all I do. And so I really do try and think about what can you do now, what can you do in 12 months, what can you do in 24 months, what is drug testing for US and international, by the way, we didn't even touch that, right? Internationally, what is that going to look like over the next 2, 3, 5 years for employers in the United States as all of this continues to change? Legal versus illegal drugs. I see in policies, we write so many policies, we work with DISA and we talk about policy all the time. All the policies deal with drug abuse. This is what Dr. Smith talked about earlier today. You can't just deal with drug abuse. You have to deal with drug use and abuse, especially when you're looking at your workplace and you're thinking about safety-sensitive employees. So when you're sitting down with your account manager, you're talking to your client service rep, you should be looking at the numbers, you should be looking at the statistics that you can print off and be saying to yourself, all right, so when I'm looking at all of these things, what are they telling me? Are we actually like covering what we want to with our drug testing program? I challenge everybody to say, and we'll get to this a little bit, like go back to like the beginning. Why are you doing it in the first place? And are you doing all the things you want to do? One of the things is you have to be thinking about use versus abuse. If I am taking my 5 milligrams of oxycodone as prescribed by my doctor for a legitimate reason, I've not tripped into this category, right? I'm not taking more than I should. I'm not combining it with other drugs. I'm not taking it for longer than I should. I'm taking it as I should for a legitimate reason. Should I be doing the job I'm doing? Can I do it effectively? Can I do it safely? Your policy needs to address use and abuse and how you're going to handle it as an HR person, and if you're in safety, how you're going to manage it from a safety perspective, and then how you're going to, you know, hook up with your friend in HR and talk about what you can do about it, right? And when Frank talked a little bit about supervisor training and employee training, you got to know how to deal with that too. Because when somebody comes up and I say, hey, I saw Frank and I don't know, I saw him, he was taking something out of a bag somewhere. Well, maybe he was just taking his oxy that he was supposed to take. You've got to know, am I allowed to get that information as a supervisor? What do I do with that information? Should I make them write it down? How do I document it? Who do I go to? There's a lot of things that you should be doing when you're designing your program, when you're looking at your program annually or semi-annually or quarterly, looking at your numbers and thinking not just, okay, I had 6% positives for marijuana. I had 3% positive for oxycodone. They did look like they did a lot of reversals. Why was this a little bit slower than that one? You got to be thinking about this more in terms of the bigger picture and the value to your workplace. You've got to be looking at all of these issues, right? If DHHS changes their panel again, pay attention, people. It's about to happen. By the end of the year, we're going to see things about oral fluid drug testing. We're going to see things about hair testing. We're going to see things about fentanyl. What does that mean to you? It means as you're going into we're in fourth quarter, right? Fourth quarter, you're doing budgeting for next year. You got to be thinking about, is there going to be an impact to that in 2019? Is there going to be an impact to that to 2020? If I'm in the states where they reference DHHS or they reference SAMSHA or they reference DOT, is it going to increase my cost and am I ready for it? It is not something that the lab, the collection site, DISA, any of us can do. It increases the cost of your program, people. Nobody's fault. Increases the cost, right? If the random rates go up, guess what's going to happen? You're going to be doing more drug testing. It's going to increase your cost. You've got to be proactively looking at your program, thinking ahead, getting the resources you can get from this team, all the people with little blue tags apparently, I didn't know that was the rule, and you've got to be listening to what they're telling you. I know it's cumbersome when you see all of these things come out that they tell you about, all of these rules and changes, but you really have to figure out how it fits into your chessboard. By the way, I don't know how to play chess. I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know how to play chess, but when you think about drug testing, you got to think about it as what's my next move, and then who's that guy and what's he gonna do, and am I ready to counter that move or handle that move when it happens, and what might he do or what might not he do, right? So drug testing in a way is similar to that, and you're playing chess and you're designing your program and you're anticipating what your needs are going to be, you're anticipating your individual workplace. And only you can do that. You can do it with DISA, you can do it with your provider, but only you can actually do it within your team and your executive board, figure out what you want to do. So you want to know all of these different things, use and abuse and addiction. Marijuana is changing every moment. It could change before we walk out of the door. You've got to understand again, what's changing? You've got to look at the laws and you've got to understand, you know, am I concerned? Why am I concerned? Is it addressed in my policy? Should I continue removing it? Remember the rules of negligent hiring. Remember the risks you're going to take. The answer, if you just do the simple math, and I'm not talking about like the new math for the 6th graders that's super hard that you have to do that you don't know how to do anymore. I'm talking about like just put the numbers down, real math, and look at what the cost of one negligent lawsuit can do for you if you choose to not take a reasonable expense and do marijuana testing. So if you're going to do that, you've got to work it into your policy, and then you've got to know all the drug testing methodologies and how to make it work best for your workplace. You need to be able to go to your executive team and spell out, even though you know the costs that are those indirect or soft costs, right? Those are harder. So you can, I think we have a slide on that. Well, you can spell it out, right? You can say more people, we're going to have higher turnover, we're going to have people calling in late, we're going to have higher workers' comp. Those are harder. But again, I challenge you to get the numbers that are easier. So take some of this data and extrapolate it out. Look at some of the information, and they have tons of this, right? Look at some of the information and say, what is turnover costing me? If my average person makes $50,000 or more a year, how much does it cost me every time I turn over that position? And how often do drug users, by the way, it's 3 times more than somebody who's a non-drug abuser, how much is that costing me? Because if I'm not testing for it, they're here. By the way, it isn't simple math. You're not going to, if you're not testing, you don't get like the regular rate of positivity or of drug use in your workplace. You get like the escalated because they're smart, right? And so drug users are going to say, they don't drug test. So the probability that you're going to get higher than the national average and have more of a problem is better. The other thing you have to remember is it's like going to the gym, right? dislike it greatly, but if you don't, then one day you figure out that you can't fit in those pants, and so you have to go buy a new pair of pants, right? There are costs, there is work to be done as you're designing your program and you're developing your program, but it is stuff that you have to do to stay healthy and fit as an organization. And so you got to be thinking about that when you're looking at the costs and you're describing this to all of the, again, powers that be at your workplace. I don't know who they are. Look at the numbers that are hard and start to put numbers. Go to your insurance carriers and look at your workers' comp rates, right? If you're in safety, then start to talk to your HR. If you're in HR, talk to your comp people in the office and find out what it cost you and what these claims were. And very often, that's the only math you have to do, because a single claim can cost you as much as implementing, say, a new random drug testing program. What type of testing? You've got to think about it. So again, this is cookie cutter versus dynamic. You can do cookie cutter. And I've heard this in all the years that I've done drug testing, where a salesperson would come in and say, like, this is what they want. They do a 5-panel, non-DOT, blah, 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 blah. And we just have to, like, regurgitate that. I absolutely disagree with that, right? So what you should be doing is working with the experts and saying, all right, so what do you guys have? They have, DISA is this giant, and I'm not here to talk about them, but right, they have this huge amount of things that you can do in a drug testing program. The likelihood that you're doing the same as the next person is probably pretty slim, because your workplace is different. Where you're doing business, what your positions are, how you're doing business are different. So you want to look at all of those different things, and you want to look at all of the different state laws that you have to cover, and we cover those in detail, but you've got to look at where you're doing business, what you want to take advantage of. So up top, the mandatory ones are, I have to do it this way. The case law ones are, what level of risk are we comfortable with as an organization, right? What cases were decided in that state, and am I comfortable to say, well, I don't know, they weren't really specific about having to do this, so we're willing to take the risk. Or, oh no, we're not doing it. Like, we think they're going to side, if we ever get sued, they're not going to, there's a probability that they're going to side with how that case went, and so we're not going to do it. So you need to know that. Workers' compensation, either you're getting a discount in the states where you can do a voluntary law. You want to look and see, what do you have to do in those voluntary states, right? Do you have to test? Do you have to post? Do you have to do a certain panel? And see if you want to take advantage of it. And then those workers, the denials, right? So I can deny, it sounds mean, I guess, but right, I can deny one unemployment claim or one workers' comp claim and pay for my whole program because I abided by what the rules said I had to do when I'm designing my program. And then industry specific, and then you got to keep your eye on this, and Frank's going to talk a little bit at the very end about how we get active and how you stay active as all of those laws change. You've got to understand the difference between the drug testing methodologies, right? What's available? What does it tell you? I am not here, I work with all of these people. I cannot say bad things or good things. I can say good. So we're going to go through a little bit of that. Neither is perfect, none are perfect, right? None are perfect. They're accurate, they're scientifically accurate, they're legally accurate, they're very good, but they're different. And so you've got to understand why they're different. And again, you shouldn't be doing the same thing as everybody else. You want to look at what might work. And you've got to remember that what works doesn't have to be the same across your entire organization, across your entire job functions, right? It can be different. You can be doing hair testing to certain groups or for certain reasons, oral fluid testing and urine testing. You can do breath alcohol. You can do all sorts of different things differently. You just have to really figure out, again, go back to basics. Why are you doing drug testing? What are you trying to achieve? Is it safety-based? Is it liability-based? Is it cost-based? Is it mandatory? And define it. So lab-based urine, right? We're going through these very quickly. Those drinks are waiting. You want to know the pros and cons. You want to know, right? Do I have to go off-site, or is there someone who can do on-site collections for me, right? What are the issues with adulteration? Do we see those? You want to be talking to your account manager. You want to be talking to your compliance person and saying, look, I'm not just looking at these statistics, but I'm seeing that we do see a lot of adulteration. Now what? Should we change this up? Can I change it up? If you can't change up the drug testing methodology, Can you change up the way you're doing something, right? Do you want to add randoms in? Because I'd start add randoms in. So you want to think about like all of the pros and cons of this and define when is urine testing going to work. And do the pros outweigh the cons or vice versa in your organization? And by the way, are you allowed to? POCT testing. Some people think this instant testing is cat's pajamas. It's not allowed in some states. For some of you, it is critical. For others, when you're looking at it and trying to figure out how to track the results and you've got a day to enter them yourself or you don't, or do you want a confirmation? Do you have to do a confirmation? Is it best practice? What's the MRO going to do in it? Again, pros and cons. Understand what they are and look, does it fit in your workplace? It does not have to fit with every single one. There are best practices, right? So if you ask me, what's the best practice? I would say, don't ever do anything without having a confirmation in a lab, period. You may say, well, it doesn't work for us and we're not going to do that. Then check your state and make sure you can. By the way, use the tool you've got. So if you can go into DISA Works and enter the drug test results, you should be doing that because you shouldn't be having somebody photocopy it because you don't want somebody to come back and say, I don't think anybody ever did a drug test on Nina. I don't know. You know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. Or I say, you did it on me, but I don't think you're doing it on all of the other people, right? So you need to have consistent information for hiring practices. Consistency is key. So again, may have a place, it may not, I don't know. Same with hair testing. Hair testing has phenomenal value in that window. If you're doing hair testing for reasonable suspicion or post-accident testing, you should stop, right? It doesn't get in your hair right after you had that accident. So it has no correlation. If you're looking at a longer window to assess, is that person a good fit for your organization? If you have a no tolerance policy that you are standing firmly with, then think about, does this work, right? But you got to know the window of detection on that last slide, and you've got to understand the pros and cons of hair testing. There are pros and cons. Longer window of detection, can't do it for post-accident reasonable suspicion. Sometimes the cost is higher. You can't maybe use the same lab, maybe you can. But these are the interactive conversations you should be having with your team at DISA when you're looking at your numbers or when you're trying to figure out what you're doing. I mean, that's ultimately what it is, right? What are we doing? What are we worried about? Are we worried about opioids? Are we worried about marijuana? Are we worried about drug use that's legal in our workplace? So this is, you know, go back to basics. Foundationally speaking, this is what we are most concerned about right now. And now help me draw out what we can do and then to fit it into, you know, your budget, your workplace, and how you run your workplace. Oral fluid testing, right? People think it's the new guy on the block. It's been around for 20 years. You can do it in most states. What are the pros? What are the cons, right? Are you going to collect it on site? Or can you say, well, you know, we can't. I don't, you know, we do remote hiring. That's not going to work for us, right? Do you want a shorter detection window for marijuana, or you want, because you say, all right, we're looking at like near-term use. We're in a state where there's recreational marijuana, right? So for those of you who are saying, I don't know, maybe it's a little too scary, do you really want somebody who didn't know to Google and find out you do drug testing, couldn't hold off for 24 hours, 18 hours? Well then, think about using oral fluid. Again, why are you doing drug testing? Who are you trying to deter? Are you suffering because you can't get bodies in the seats? Are they low-risk jobs? You've got to define it. And there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not here to say, you know, your program's good and your program's bad. Define the program, define your needs, and then design your program and your policy to meet those needs. So what are the pros and cons of oral fluid drug testing? Know what they are. Know what your legal responsibility is in your state. Know how you work as a company, right? Can you keep them on site? Is it great that your people don't have to go off site to have a test done? Do you need an instant result? Well, oral fluid lab-based drug testing doesn't, so you've got to know those things and define it. And then when you're doing your program review, I, again, have been on so many of these in so many years where I've sat down and I've looked at people doing whatever you call it, a quarterly business review, a annual business review. You're sitting down and you just get your stats and you're kind of like, this was kind of cool, and then you put it in that pile, and then at some point you're like, should I file this or should I look at it again? Or, oh, I don't know, they kind of want to come to meet with me, but I don't really have time for it. You should have time for it, right? There's so much happening right now in drug testing. It's ridiculous. It's kind of exciting if you get excited about stuff like this. But you want to be thinking about all of these different things. And again, designing your program and your policy to say, what are all of these different things? Should I change up my program? And it doesn't have to be a once and done, right? Pilot programs, testing. Do you think it would be interesting to change the panel? What would happen if on our cybersecurity team, I'm making this up, right? Our cybersecurity team, we added fentanyl, or we added something. We're concerned about amphetamines and stimulants for this particular group. We have people with pharmacy access, and the people who have pharmacy access, we're really scared about drug deterrence, so we want to have a program for that group. If you're doing your policy right within the state laws as required, then you can design programs that meet different needs for different employee populations or different segments of your population, and they are much more effective. And you ultimately will see the return on the investment because you're doing something that actually fits. You're putting you're putting the right shoes on, and it fits, and you'll see a better return on investment. And you got to think about all these different things, right? So legal and regulatory, budget, and workplace. What meets your needs? What is your budget? What are you required to do? And you've got to understand it. It doesn't change, right? So marijuana is changing very quickly, and you've got to keep up on that. 20 states have laws that reflect the DOT, HHS, or SAMSHA in their state laws, and so as that changes, there's some downstream implications to that. Case laws will affect your program, but it isn't moving at the speed of sound, right? It's not like the news, but you do have to keep up on it, and you get the information, so you've got to digest it and read it and be looking forward to what it could mean for your organization as you go forward. Okay. Frank,
all right.
turn it over to you.
Thank you, Nina. As we talk about get involved, right, it makes me reminisce on the much younger days when I was playing college athletics, football, and had an opportunity to try to go play professional. And there was something that always stood out for me. What stood out was I had a coach that said, Frank, people play differently when you keep score. Right? And at the time, I'm, 21, 22-year-old kid. I'm like, okay, what the heck are you talking about? People play differently when you keep score. As I've matured, I've been able to understand and appreciate that concept. And that concept is applicable here. It's applicable in two aspects. The first aspect is taking this information that you've been able to acquire from the conference today and going back and truly applying it within your organizations. And if that means doing a review or if that means doing a total rewrite, applying those concepts as you move forward. The other piece is, and which I think is most important, and is sometimes the piece that's forgotten about, is literally how are you holding the elected officials in your area accountable? People play differently when you keep score. As employers, are you holding these elected officials accountable? All right? And so here at DISA, what we like to do is we like to get involved in that particular process and provide support to our client base. And part of that providing support is if you don't know how to do it, please reach out and contact us. We can help you navigate through that. We also have provided a link to federal and state officials. Well, we'll even help you draft the most appropriate letters for your concerns. But I submit to you, your voice must be heard. Your voice must be heard. Legislation is changing, and it is happening without you being actively involved. So I ask you to reach out and let us help you navigate through that particular process. We'll help you write letters. We'll help you prepare speaking points and talking points. And through Nina's great programs, we can help you follow bills through current compliance as well. So let's get actively engaged. So with that being said, I think we delivered in terms of getting you being bright, being brief, and of course being gone. And so we have essentially a little less than 10 minutes left. I want to thank you for taking the time to come to our first official day with DISA. I will encourage you to stay for the mixer. If you have individual or specific questions, we will have all of the experts at tables. Please engage the experts and get your specific question answered. With that being said, if you need to contact Nina or I, this is our contact information listed on the screen. It'll be part of the information that's submitted to you. And humbly, I submit to you, thank you, thank you, thank you.